Northern Virginia. This is Nova Weekend Warriors, focused on those runners, cyclists, athletes, outdoor enthusiasts, and fans of fitness in the Northern Virginia area. I'm Meg Donnelly, a licensed massage therapist in Herndon, Virginia, focused on those weekend warriors. As with every episode of Nova Weekend Warriors, this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as advice, medical or otherwise. The views of guests in each episode are solely their own and not necessarily the views of the Nova Weekend Warriors podcast or of Meg Donnelly in her capacity as a licensed massage therapist. And now that that is out of the way, I am very excited for today's episode. So today we are going to be speaking with Yogi Gretchen Schutte. Now, Gretchen began her yoga journey in 2006 when she started practicing yoga as a method of stress relief. Her practice grew and she found the physical benefits of her practice to be valuable as well. She is a certified Vinyasa yoga, Yin Yoga, and Yoga Nidra teacher. She believes that yoga is for everybody, which I love, and we're definitely going to talk about that. And the benefits of yoga, including balance, breath, and mindfulness. How that can be utilized off the mat in every area of our lives. For today's purposes, we're going to narrow our scope a little bit, and we are going to talk about how Yin Yoga can be used as an added benefit of mobility for clients that may have other fitness goals, whether that's running, cycling, anything else that they're doing from a fitness perspective. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
No doubt. And I do appreciate that we're narrowing the topic down because, Meg, you and I have talked, and I can talk for a very long time specifically about yoga because I'm completely in love. One of my favorite things about yoga, though, is Yin Yoga. And as you mentioned, Yin Yoga is amazing for improving mobility. And it's also wonderful for aiding in recovery from activities like running, cycling, lifting, swimming, anything you might be doing with an ing on it that's very active, and actually, for another yoga word, very yang, very dynamic. Those kinds of activities that we do that are yang are all about the muscles and the yang tissue, the active tissue that needs to be stressed by doing activities like load-bearing activities. Now, Yin Yoga, on the other side of the spectrum, Yin Yoga is so wonderful as a complement to those yang activities. And Yin Yoga, now what may kind of strike people as a little off-putting, is it's a slower style of yoga. However, it's very beneficial. And so this slower paced style of yoga, poses are held for extended periods of time. And that's because it's going to be influencing the yin tissues. And so our yin tissues are things like, and I'm sure, Meg, you've worked with these as a massage therapist, our fascia, our tendons, and our ligaments. You could even consider bone yin tissue, and all those tissues are drier and more static than muscle or flesh or even the fluids that run through our body. And so because the yin tissue is drier and more static, it really appreciates that slower paced spending time and lingering in poses, which is the pursuit of yin yoga. And so when we spend time in those poses and linger, again, I said it's the opposite of that yang activity, we begin to create space and we begin to stress, which is not a negative word, it's simply a function of physics, but we stress the tissues like fascia and we stress our tendons and ligaments in a very gentle, long hold sort of way. And that begins to create space. And the fascia itself could be binding someone up. Let's say you can't lift your leg high enough or you can't get deep enough into a squat. It could be connective tissue that's holding you back, not your ability to go deeper into the squat physically. And so when you work with poses, say something that's influencing your hip region, you can begin to make space, and that adds to the mobility, being able to take a longer stride, being able to take a deeper swing, being able to reach higher because of those shapes that we linger in the practice of yin.
Sure. And I think too that there's a couple of things that I want to touch on there. And one of those things is I may come to it from a different perspective, right? So for me, fascia is perhaps a little bit less is a little bit less flexible in terms of what, my thinking and my background,
Right.
and in terms of knowledge of it. But what ends up happening is when we're focusing and we're kind of within ourselves holding a pose and feeling like that's stretching out, then what that in turn does is affect the nervous system, which is going to send a release to your body. So it's not always that I'm saying that I'm physically making changes to the fascia. I may or may not, and that may be under dispute depending on who you talk to and what areas of the world.
Sure.
But I think it's more so that if I'm kind of in that mindset that I'm stretching out these things, it allows my body to protect less and to kind of allow me to open up a little bit more. So would you kind of, we obviously are coming from two very different perspectives on this, but would you agree that maybe the way that we interpret it would be different, but we're still after the same goal? Or do you think I'm way off base here?
No, I don't think you're off base. And it's definitely the same end goal of having more mobility, having more flexibility in the body, and then having an activity you can do that is the opposite of running or lifting, that helps calm the body back down and helps the body recover, right? On top of having the relaxation, having the sense of spaciousness, you're also creating, your body's generating these organisms that begin to recover and repair things you may have broken down during a very fun and active activity.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get into Yin Yoga to begin with?
So I joke that if I had started running before I did yoga, that I wouldn't have gotten off the finish line at all. So I was a yogi first, and somewhere in my late 20s, early 30s, I decided, why not? Let's try something new. Let's just try running. So I did a Couch to 5K, which is theoretically 8 weeks. It took me 12. And went over time, just began to build into running, and eventually got to running half marathons. And I would have never been able to do any of that if I did not have my practice of yoga, for many different reasons. The mindfulness that comes with it, the ability to focus on a goal. Running, I'm sure lots of folks out there, as well as cycling and swimming, is a very meditative activity. That consistency in the practice is something that you really just drop into a space. You guys are meditating, which is amazing. And then on the physical side of things, I was actively practicing yoga 2 or 3 times a week, if not more. And that kept my hamstrings happy, kept my hips happy, and helped stretch everything back out. But when I really began to find yin classes, that slower paced practice, and lingering in poses that were influencing the regions, let's say above the kneecap up into the lower rib cage, I was able to spend time in lingering those poses and creating space and finding this, again, the recovery and then the mobility where my stride was getting better. And I was excited to see this improvement and just feeling better as a runner. And so then I share that at the yoga studio I teach at. I've had the opportunity to work with some CrossFit gyms, as well as another strength and endurance gym, and some places locally here in Sterling, just to share these practices for the benefits they have physically, but as I noted earlier, the benefits they have in regards to that mindfulness and slowing things down, because life is a little fast paced, and that might be putting it mildly.
Especially here in Northern Virginia.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have people come in, they're vibrating when they walk into the studio. I'm like, whoa. And by the time they leave, they're floating. And I'm like, yes, we did it again.
Exactly.
So it's been such a blessing just for my own body, the fact that I can still run. And I've been able to help others improve their well-being and their ability to do the activities that they truly love.
Yeah. We'll continue with today's episode in just a moment, but first, a word from today's sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Denise Rodriguez of DR House Realty Group. Denise has lived in the Northern Virginia area for over 35 years and is extremely knowledgeable about all things Northern Virginia. She is my trusted real estate advisor. She's assisted me personally, as well as my family, friends, and colleagues more times than I can count. Denise Rodriguez has her designations as a green realtor and a senior real estate specialist, so she can identify solutions that best meet the needs of the health-focused weekend warrior at every stage of their life. Find out more by connecting with Denise at drhouserealty.com or message her on Facebook at Dr. House Realty. That's DRHouserealty. And now back to our episode. And so I think what you would say, tell me if I'm on the right train of thought, but because in yoga terms, what we're doing in most exercise, most of those ing exercises is considered yang by yoga standards. So those are constant movement, very dynamic, right?
Yes. Yes.
And yin yoga tends to be a little bit more static. And so one of the things that I have questioned or thought about is typically when I was working in a fitness club, we did not do static stretches before exercise. It was always done after. So we did dynamic first and then we did static. So when I'm going into yin yoga, that's kind of a different mentality, right? Because I'm going right into these static stretches, or how does that work?
No, it is a little different. And there's multiple trains of thought when it comes to dynamic stretching versus static stretching. And I wouldn't argue that different things work for different bodies, right? And different shapes work for different bodies. So yin yoga typically is a practice that you would come into cold, and you would do that. You would take a yin yoga practice just walking in off the street and sitting down. And all the poses, as a side note, are all poses that are usually seated or lying down, or facing the floor, poses that are very grounded, and so that the muscles can quiet, and it can just be a very relaxing but can be intense practice. Now, one of the classes that I lead at a yoga studio, Inner Power Yoga, where I teach, it's a practice that allows, and I offer a bit of movement prior to the yin practice. And I do that because people are coming in from, we noted earlier, a world that is just like a pinball game. And to go from that to lie down, it may be a bit jarring. So I offer a little bit of movement just to ground the body. I talk about getting rid of the gremlins and then moving into these static holds. And the yin practice itself, the theory behind it is you do practice it with a cooler or cold body so that the muscles are quiet and the muscles do not take away from that activity with the yin tissue. Because as I'm sure some of us know, our muscles has a very important job of protecting us. Mm-hmm. And so they take the brunt of activity. They take the brunt of whether it's running or lifting, that we use the muscles to do that. And so the muscles are constantly protecting our ligaments and our tendons and our bones. And so if you were to, heaven forbid, pull something, you're going to tear muscle before you would tear ligament or tendon, before you would do something else really, really terrible. And so that quiet, colder practice is so that the muscles can stop doing their job for a little while. And then, like I said, the poses will then influence and create that spaciousness physically as well as mentally in the body.
Mm-hmm. And I think that almost completely opposite, right, of what we're doing in other times of our life. And so for us to take that time to respect the opposite,
yes,
I think is really important. That's really great.
No, I agree 100%. And that's one of the things, I love my activity, and I go to a gym twice a week. I practice vinyasa yoga, which is a yang dynamic practice. Like I said, I run. I've gotten into trail running recently, which I really love. But that on top of working and teaching and life, finding those spaces, creating space for ourselves to just take time to be able to relax and be able to reconnect with the breath and with your, with just being present, I think makes us better people to go back out into that active world and show up fully.